Dr. for that nice introduction. And I also wanted to say thank you to the School of Middle East and North African Studies for giving me this opportunity today. And I see that many of you are here from Dr. Gamal's retirement reception, and I want to say thank you for coming on a 4 o'clock on Friday. And particularly Dr. Gamal, even on the day of your retirement, here you are. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you being here. Thank you for sharing your day with me. So this presentation is based on a paper that has been accepted for publication, as Dr. Betteridge mentioned. And I just want to say that it's going to appear alongside 2 other papers by my colleagues, Timur Hammond and Elizabeth Angel, who I met with regularly in Istanbul during my fieldwork to discuss the direction of our work. And so in part, the way this started is a collaborative project, thinking of Istanbul through assemblage theory. And so I'll reflect that a little bit in my talk today. I'd like to start with a 1-minute clip. It's from a short film called Wonderland, which is by Halil Altındere, and it premiered at the Biennial in 2013. And it features the rap group Tarabadi Isyan. So I'm sorry for the poor quality. A friend of mine is like holding her camera at the installation, taping it for me, but you'll get the idea. Okay. A young man in a hoodie is running from the Zabita, the municipal police. The police car chases him through a neighborhood with streets lined in trash. An open fire burns in a metal barrel. The crumbling buildings show few signs of their former residence. No doors or windows, just gaping holes and graffiti on the walls. The boy turns the corner where a spray-painted sign on a metal fence ironically admonishes people, "Buraya çöp atmayınız, don't throw your trash here." He ducks through a gutted building, jumping over concrete rubble and piles of things left behind. He has lost the police for now, but he continues to run. The camera pulls back, offering us the larger picture. We are in Sulukule, or at least what is left of the neighborhood after its infamous demolition. From the trash and the empty homes and the graffiti, the camera zooms out and away, moving over the new housing development that replaced the old homes of Sulukule. Where eclectic and colorfully painted 2-story homes used to crowd up against each other and press close to the Theodosian wall, now there are neo-Ottoman condominiums, clean, new, identical. They rise out of the center of the neighborhood and seem to threaten the remaining homes with prospects of future demolitions, future renewals. The camera then dives back into the old neighborhood and takes us into a home where Turkish rapper Fuat Ergin sits on a plush red seat wearing an army jacket and a mock crown. He is the stereotypical yet contemporary Gypsy king, flanked by 2 men in suits signaling associations with the mafia. The young man who escapes the police stands with 2 other young men now, presenting themselves before the king, who instructs them. They're at the gates to knock down our neighborhood. Today it is Sulukule, tomorrow Balat. Ukmedana, Tarlavasha, Gezi Parka. Time's running out. They're taking from the poor and giving to the rich. Knock down the shanties to build up expensive apartments. Let art and music be your armaments, Tarabadi Isyan. Stop the demolitions, come on, yo. This opening scene from Wonderland introduces the central concerns of my presentation today, namely the role of Istanbul's Roma, or Gypsy residents, in making the city, and the role of urban politics in the making of Romani identity. I use the term making here in the sense used by Ignacio Farias to refer to, quote, how urban materials, technologies, and different urban life forms are composed and hold together in practice, and the multiple ways of dwelling in the city, and the understanding that these involve multiple ways of constructing the city. As the most notorious example of urban renewal in Istanbul, attracting global attention to the situation of Turkey's Romani minority, Sulukule is an apt site to address these concerns. Until 2009, Sulukule was located in the Fatih municipality. The neighborhood attracted both locals and foreigners to their eğlence evleri, which were entertainment houses, where nightly performances were held until the houses were shut down by the municipality in the late 90s. Parts of the neighborhood had experienced several demolitions from the 1950s onward, as had other neighborhoods. But in 2006, the Fatih municipality received authorization from the Turkish cabinet to expropriate the entire neighborhood for renewal and development. Now Sulukule is actually most well known for the urban renewal project that resulted in its complete disappearance from the map. So in this scene from Wonderland, dislocated Roma youth from Sulukule are charged with going out to protect the city. They are sent out by the Gypsy king, armed with art and music, to stop the demolitions that are razing historic and low-income neighborhoods to the ground. The suggestion that marginalized Roma from Sulukule, who are only armed with art and music, actually have this kind of power, it might seem unrealistic. But I'm arguing that the film signals a recent phenomenon, that the networks and relationships that have assembled around the controversial demolition of Sulukule are producing multiple positionalities for Istanbul's Roma, opening up new spaces for their explicit participation in urban public life. Furthermore, in the heightened political atmosphere around Sulukule, performance has been reconceptualized as political, and music and dance have been taken up effectively as tools of activism. The rap group featured in this film, Tarabadi Isyan, which means revolt's destruction, loosely, is one strong example of this phenomenon. The images in this first scene of Wonderland also beg questions about the relationship between urban residents and their built environment. We get a sense that the young man running from the Zabita knows these streets intimately. He's able to use that knowledge, right? He ducks through a house to get away while the police car gets stuck down a narrow street. There's also a clear distinction in the film between the partially demolished homes and streets lined with trash and the new housing development. The young man obviously belongs to the former space but doesn't have access to the latter. In presenting this relationship between Istanbul's urban environment and the making of a Roma urban identity, I investigate the entanglements of individuals and their material surroundings in order to provide a framework within which to explore the constitution and distribution of agency. Finally, the film presents a binary relationship commonly represented in art and scholarship on Istanbul, that between the global and the local. You've all heard that about Turkey, right? The bridge and all of that. Beginning in the particular space of an Istanbul neighborhood, the camera zooms out to establish a larger context in which the drama is taking place. It signals capitalist urbanization and the dispossession of marginalized urban citizens, issues of concern in cities around the world today. I attempt a similar maneuver by presenting first an ethnographic analysis of a particular neighborhood that then scopes out to explore its global context. But in contrast to much of the other scholarship on Sulukule, I don't propose that global processes are simply acting upon local objects. Instead, I trace dynamic relationships of power as they're established and move across and between local and global networks in order to explore, as I said, distributions of agency. Who and what is taken into account and who or what is not. So these three assertions of mine that I'll address today, that the demolition of Sulukule has resulted in a new urban Roma identity, that this new identity is relational and produced by both human and non-human actors, and that it's produced by asymmetrical distributions of power and agency across local and global networks. These assertions are influenced by scholarship and assemblage urbanism. So I'll take a moment to explain what that is. There's been a move in the social sciences recently to rethink the urban. Among several new approaches, the notion of assemblage has emerged as one particularly productive conceptual framework. My co-authors and I find assemblage urbanism useful in the way it speaks to the relational and the ongoing, and the way it helps us to rethink human and non-human materialities and agencies through relations of unequal capacities. We find this approach particularly constructive in thinking Istanbul. Scholarship on Istanbul has largely been interested in the city's integration into global flows of capital, people, and ideas, and how that is reshaping the city's built and social environments. The most recent scholarship analyzes Istanbul in terms of what is often referred to as its neoliberal turn, exploring the relationship between modes of subjecthood, economic progress, religious practice, political governance, and urban transformation. We argue that the notion of assemblage provides an important complement to the scholarship, helping us to understand that Istanbul is not one single object upon which various discrete actors act, but rather an immensely varied socio-material product which emerges as a result of various ongoing processes. Assemblage urbanism allows us to problematize the idea of local agents resisting global flows and to rethink the contingent dimensions of agency. It also helps us think of Istanbul not as something that exists per se, but as something that is variously and differentially assembled. So now I'll turn to how I apply this to my own ethnographic research. The demolition of Sulukule resulted, among other things, in the production of an extensive body of academic literature. Much of that literature engages issues around heritage preservation, macroeconomic and political processes such as urban development and neoliberalism, and rights discourses such as the right to the city and Romani rights. Taken together, these works reveal the multiple debates and issues that Sulukule engages. While the demolition of Sulukule was and is indeed about heritage, urbanization, state politics, and minority and housing rights, I propose a perspective that considers how these positions are interrelated and that describes their becoming rather than relying on external explanations. Assemblage theory offers several benefits to my analysis of Sulukule. First, there's no ontological commitment to the existence of essences or enduring identities. While attempts have been made by scholars of Sulukule like Paul Robbins to rediscover, quote, what Sulukule is or was or could actually be about, I propose there is no one origin or essence of the neighborhood. Rather, Sulukule is made up of assemblages that are constantly being produced and reproduced inside larger political, activist, and academic networks and relationships of power. Am I going too quickly? Okay, so what is that larger context I'm talking about? I'll spend a brief period describing some of the networks and actors involved in the making and remaking of Sulukule as an object of study and intervention. I'll trace connections between the urban activist and Romani rights networks that have been assembled around Sulukule and the prolific amount of knowledge that they've produced. Then I'll return to analysis of this film, Wonderland, and a case study of Taraba de Isyan, a hip-hop group that formed in the aftermath of the demolition of Sulukule and has more recently come to represent not only the neighborhood, but also the perceived evils of urban renewal in Istanbul in general on a global stage. I'll demonstrate how these three young men from Sulukule experience and define larger economic processes that are shaping their urban environment and ultimately contribute to new forms of civic engagement for the Roma of Turkey. Sulukule Assemblages Part 1, Following the Networks. Alongside the destructive actions of the bulldozers that left a razed neighborhood and a dislocated community, much was also produced around the controversy of Sulukule's demolition, including new connections between Turkish and international rights organizations and flows of resources, including funding and knowledge. The public importance, I think that I have skipped something, sorry. The public importance and social impact of the neighborhood, its community, and its demolition only grew as activists, artists, academics, politicians, and the media added to the narrative. An enormous amount of material has been produced, including news articles, protest videos, and letters of support. This material circulates so that the symbolic weight of Sulukule continues to reverberate along multiple networks, not only tying various collectivities in Istanbul together, but also extending beyond Turkey to rights movements and discourses around the world. In particular, international Romani rights organizations took a huge interest in Sulukule and consequently turned more attention to the status of Turkey's Roma in general. So to give you a brief introduction to the Roma of Turkey, estimates of the current population of Roma in Turkey range from all the way from 300,000 to 2 million. So it's somewhat unreliable. And the reason is that official census figures in Turkey don't include ethnic composition of the population. Furthermore, Turkey's Roma rarely possess identity cards, although that is changing now. They're not designated an official minority either, and I don't have time to talk about why that is, but maybe it can come up during the Q&A. Globally, Roma is an ethnic and linguistic designation, but it's also often used in Turkey to distinguish either territorial or occupational or even cultural differences. Non-Romani Turks have used the derogatory word çingene to refer to the Roma, but use of this term is diminishing as Turks become more and more aware of the Roma and their social marginalization because of NGO activism and interventions in education. The Roma are among the world's most persecuted and least integrated people and have been subjected to discrimination, racism, violence, and assimilation throughout their history, wherever they are. They're often socially marginalized, particularly in the areas of education, employment, health, and housing. It's no different in Turkey, where the proverb, Türkiye'de 66,5 millet var, which means that there are 66.5 nationalities in Turkey. And that half refers to the common perception that the Roma are not full Turkish citizens. Oh, I'll leave it there. So now we're on track. Okay. The most common, sorry about that. The most common Roma occupations in Turkish cities are in semi-formal economies, particularly entertainment, like music and dance, and flower selling, as you see here. They're also involved in informal occupations as scrap iron recyclers, hurdacı, garbage collectors, shoe shiners, vendors, buskers, and beggars, making them very visible in the streets, but also socially and economically marginalized. They often suffer mental illness and physical conditions due to narcotics abuse and heavy use of cigarettes and alcohol. But because many of them don't hold Turkish identity cards, they lack access to social services. Their encounters with the state are often limited to negative interactions with police and zabita. In the course of my fieldwork, I came across many Roma women who were living with their parents or raising their children on their own because their husbands were in prison for theft or a drug-related offense or some kind of violent crime. Social discrimination is a shared experience among the Roma of Turkey, yet there has generally been a lack of a sense of solidarity until recently. In my interviews, the Roma of Sulukule referred to the nomadic Roma who used to set up tents near their neighborhood as çingene in order to distinguish them from their own community of Roma. Similarly, Roma in other neighborhoods would express distaste for the Roma from Sulukule, particularly because they allowed their women to work in the entertainment houses as dancers, which can be associated with prostitution. Although the Roma of Istanbul also often live in proximity to other marginalized urban groups, especially Kurds, they don't feel a sense of solidarity with other marginalized populations either. In fact, there's a notorious tension between the Roma and the Kurds of Istanbul over access to resources and competition for employment. And violence does sometimes break out between their respective communities. You can read about it in the news. Many of my Roma informants actually actively distance themselves and the Romani rights movement in Turkey from the Kurdish movement, saying that Kurds were separatists and we're not. And of course, that's a whole other discussion that we can talk about after if you want. One reason for the lack of solidarity among Turkey's Roma is that they don't consider themselves to be an ethnic group. In my interviews, Roma informants identified first and foremost as Turkish Muslims. Roma was a cultural designation, or as Erdogan says, alt kimliği, like the sub-identity. As Adrian Marsh reports, in Turkey, the notion of regarding the Gypsies as a separate ethnic minority is largely rejected, even by Gypsies themselves, as it's seen as divisive and therefore discriminatory. This contrasts with the European context, in which ethnic minority status is seen as a measure towards integration and the ensuring of equal access, opportunities, and rights. My research suggests that there is some sense of a shared identity, as Roma from different neighborhoods will come together for special occasions like a wedding or a sunet, a circumcision ceremony, especially if there are any kind of family connections that cross mahalle or neighborhood boundaries. Similarly, Roma communities will commingle for celebrations of Hidriles, which is a festival celebrating the coming of spring. And more recently, more and more of them are being involved in World Romani Day, which is actually an international holiday celebrating Roma culture around the world. This points to, this last one, attending World Romani Day actually points to a shifting sense of identity and solidarity among Turkey's Roma due to the mobilization of Romani rights and organization of Roma Associations in the last decade. This is in part due to the Turkish law on associations of 2004, which allowed associations to be established on the basis of race, ethnicity, religion, or region, and enabled the Roma to set up associations in order to pursue their common objectives. The law also facilitated cooperation with organizations, such as so I'll go back a little bit. I listed some of them here, such as the Helsinki Citizens Assembly, the Accessible Life Foundation, and a lot of funding comes in from the EU for this. Since 2004, Romani associations have been founded in cities all over Turkey, from Diyarbakir to Istanbul. And in 2006, 2 federations of Romani associations was established. EDROM, or Edirne Roma Association, has been the most prominent Romani association in Turkey, particularly due to its involvement in projects funded by the ERRC, which is the European Roma Rights Center. This trend toward cooperation with international Romani organizations is increasing a sense of global solidarity between the Roma of Turkey and those of the Balkans in particular. And I'll go back to this slide. I don't have time to talk about the Roma Açılımı, which is the AK Party's Roma initiative, but I wanted to share this picture with you. It's Erdogan with Kibariye, which is one of the most famous Roma singers in Turkey. And she's telling him, "You're so handsome." Apparently, according to the news, she told him, "You're so handsome." Yeah, that's true. The mobilization of Romani rights. Hang on, I'll take that moment to get some water.
Take a look at the expression on the fellow on the lower leg.
I didn't even notice that. He's a little jealous, maybe. Is it really? Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. I didn't know that.
He resigned amid misunderstandings about some finances.
Oh, right. Haven't heard anything about that kind of thing lately in Turkey, have we? So the mobilization of Romani rights in Turkey also increased significantly with the threat of demolition in Sulukule. In response to the original urban renewal proposal submitted by the Fatih municipality, a coalition known as the Sulukule Platform was formed. The artists, academics, and activists involved organized benefit concerts, and street rallies, circulated petitions against the demolition, and gave hundreds of press conferences in Turkey and abroad. The stated aim of the platform was to convince the city to rehabilitate the neighborhood rather than to demolish it, emphasizing the historical importance of the area and the tangible and intangible heritage of the Roma. Local and international journalists got involved, initiating an explosion in popularity of documentaries, films, CDs, etc. All kinds of products that celebrated Sulukule's Romani culture and decried the threat of its loss. So people were educated about Sulukule through these products as they circulated around the world. Although there were local competing definitions of Sulukule's heritage and its value, the music and dance practices of one portion of the community came to represent the whole neighborhood. A huge event called 40 Days, 40 Nights was staged at the demolition site, and international figures like Golgo Bordello, if you've heard of them, a gypsy punk band, Tony Gatliff, a film director, Manu Chao, Sezen Aksu, I think probably the most famous star in Turkey. They all either visited Sulukule during this event or they voiced support for the event. So lots of press, lots of attention. Despite these efforts to prevent the urban renewal project, however, the remaining houses in Sulukule were demolished in November of 2009. 850 families were dislocated. Now the people, the structures, and the street layout of Sulukule are entirely gone. Residents were offered units and apartment blocks in Taşoluk, built by TOKİ. TOKİ is Turkey's Housing Development Association, But these homes were 40 kilometers outside of the city center, where it would have been very difficult for them to find employment. So only 4 families, when I left at least, there were still 4 families in those homes in Taşoluk, but most of them had returned either to the center of Istanbul or they'd gone to other cities around Turkey like Edirne. So from what I found, I would say about 40% of them actually returned to the neighborhood right up the hill from where Sulukule used to be, in an area called Karagümrük. And that's the area that we saw in the film, actually, because of course by the time the film was made, the neighborhood had been demolished. A few projects initiated by the Sulukule Platform members continue there with displaced Sulukule Roma. But the platform has since lost some members, gained new ones, enlarged their agenda to include other Istanbul neighborhoods slated for demolition, like Tarlabaşı in particular, and largely redirected its efforts away from Sulukule. But one of the few projects that is still active is the Sulukule Children's Art Atelier, and it was officially opened in Karagümrük in 2010, so after the demolition, when activists from the platform noticed the importance of preserving what they call intangible heritage. They're getting this from UNESCO, right? That was threatened by the demolition of the neighborhood. The atelier's stated aim is, quote, to increase the self-confidence of the community, to express their culture, demand their civil rights, and communicate openly with non-Roma society. The atelier offers weekly music classes to young children, most of them Roma, originally from Sulukule, but some of them from other Roma families in the area, or even non-Roma children from the area. With time, the atelier has become a kind of community center where young people can go to get help with their homework or really just hang out, have something to do after school if their parents are working, for example, or they don't necessarily go to school. Tarabati Isyan found support and encouragement at the atelier. And the members of the group are of mixed background. Actually, only one of them is originally from Sulukule. But through their affiliation with the atelier, they've all become very invested in the public relevance of the neighborhood's demolition. The boys originally met in school, and through networks of mutual friends, they started rapping together just for fun. But they ended up at the atelier giving free breakdance lessons and freestyle lessons to the younger kids in exchange for free use of the space to practice their own stuff. Since then, they've attracted the attention of many Turkish and international journalists, academics, artists, and activists who visit the atelier regularly. With the promotion of the atelier's founder and director, Funda Oral, several such visitors have agreed to provide temporary support for various projects with the group, including music videos. They actually even have a song on Amnesty International's Listen to Roma Rights CD. They've done local concerts, art installations, all kinds of things, and of course, Wonderland. One particular nonprofit arts and cultural organization based in London called Open Visor took a special interest in Tarabati Isyan and initiated a large hip-hop theater project with the group. The director of the nonprofit, Abbas, and forgive me if I mispronounce his last name, I never heard him say it, Nokaste, I think. We'll just call him Abbas. Brought Jonesy D, a famous hip-hop artist from London and the artistic director of the International Festival of Hip-Hop Dance Theater called Break-In Convention. He came to the atelier to work with the group. And later that year, they actually took the 3 rappers, Slang, Zengi, and Vezi, to London to participate in this festival. It was their first time outside of Turkey. They got passports. It was this huge deal. Abbas also made multiple trips to the atelier to bring together various theater and film artists to work on the project. And Open Visor funded the final product, which was a short film called Sahnede Isyan, which means revolt on stage. So in the first half of my presentation, I have outlined some of the local and international networks that have assembled around Romani rights in Turkey, and particularly how those networks were shaped by the demolition of Sulukule in order to point to the complex assemblages of organizations and individuals that are dynamically established across and between what we often call the global and the local. But what are the consequences of this complexity? What do these assemblages actually produce? Importantly, as I've said, knowledge has accumulated around Sulukule, from news media to arts projects, from urban design workshops to activist events, academic articles to human rights reports. The result is this kind of common knowing now that when you actually say Sulukule, everybody assumes that you're talking about the same thing. So even if it's in print, there's kind of this unspoken consensus about what you're discussing when you bring up Sulukule. But I suggest that a lot is actually left out of the conversation, because alongside all these new networks and new alliances, there have also emerged clashing agendas among activists, failed attempts at lasting solidarity among the Roma in the neighborhood and outside, and also conflicts over resources. So I'm going to turn now to a moment of discord, when some things came together and other things fell apart, in order to demonstrate why one portrayal of Sulukule as a cohesive event or whole doesn't quite work. So this is part 2, Tarabat Isyan and the New Urban Roma. Tarabat Isyan's representation of Sulukule in the film Wonderland can be traced to multiple assemblages and networks, as I've said, that go beyond the neighborhood, from the Sulukule Platform to Open Visor, and even further beyond, to the international culture and the shared symbols of hip-hop. But more importantly, perhaps, Wonderland brings us to Sulukule as it exists now. No longer a neighborhood in real space, no longer a place on the map, but a place that continues to echo beyond its demolition. By the time Wonderland was filmed, Sulukule had already been completely demolished. But the powerful symbolism in the film confirms my assertion that although it no longer exists in material form, the neighborhood endures as a place. As Vezi raps, Sulukule'de oturmuyorum ama yaşıyorum. I'm not settled in Sulukule, but I live there. Sulukule is continuously reproduced by shifting relationships between its former residents and other stakeholders, and these relationships exist within a constantly emerging set of tensions between various claims to what Sulukule is or what it's supposed to represent. As I've demonstrated from the beginning of the Urban Renewal project for Sulukule, Urban Renewal proposal for Sulukule, stakeholders other than the neighborhood's residents were involved in negotiating its direction. I will show how these relationships continue to have powerful repercussions for the direction of urban activism in Istanbul and Romani rights in Turkey in general. The lyrics of Tarabat Isyan's early songs are about cars and women and money, an expression of youth and their desire to become rich and famous through their music. With the attention and influence of outsiders to their community who are generally interested in the politics around Sulukule's demolition, their lyrics have undergone a dramatic shift. Now their songs address universal social issues like discrimination and prejudice, and issues specific to Turkey, to Istanbul, to Karagümrük. For example, Zenci performs a song that critiques the public education system in Turkey. The group also performs a song about the problems of drug addiction in their neighborhood. The rappers criticize the demolition of Sulukule as well. Vezi raps in one of their songs, "Sulukule is the gun and we are its bullets." Similarly, in their music video, Ghetto Machines, Tarabat Isyan appears at the site of old Sulukule inside demolished buildings or next to the condos, the new condos. And at the end of the video, they urinate on the Toki sign that is at the entrance to the new housing development. With increased attention to urban problems in Istanbul due to the recent Occupy movement in Gezi Park in summer 2013, Tarabat Isyan has come to represent Sulukule on a larger scene, performing concerts at protests and writing songs that explicitly critique the government and their housing policies. Largely due to Wonderland, shown to thousands of visitors at the Istanbul Biennial, the music of Tarabat Isyan has become the soundtrack for urban protest in Istanbul. They rap, "We pissed on the foundations of the newly built blocks because I was pissed at Toki. My town will be torn down too. Sulukule now belongs to the bourgeoisie." Although the Wonderland video had been shot before the Gezi Park protests, it was chosen to be included in the biennial because it spoke to the concerns of the moment, namely gentrification and the displacement of the urban poor. In the film, the rap group simulate beating up and setting fire to a security guard who's protecting the gated condominiums in Sulukule. And later they're shot, but they remain standing and rapping with the bloody bullet wounds in their chest. For this reason, the film garnered mixed reactions from local and international artists and activists. For urban activists in Istanbul, the film was received in the context of the Gezi Park protests and understood as part of ongoing efforts to point out the injustices of urban renewal in Istanbul. For others, however, the violence portrayed in the film went too far. Roma Association leaders have not come out in support of the group as representative of Roma identity or culture, not even the Roma Association from Sulukule. And some activists have expressed concern that the violence depicted in the film might actually undermine the cause by reinforcing stereotypes about the Roma as aggressive or violent and further justifying demolitions like the one that happened in Sulukule. The most extreme reaction came from Abbas, who released a public statement on behalf of Open Visor. Remember, Abbas is the one who actually funded a different video project with the rap group from London. And he clearly condemned the video. So I'll read part of his statement. He said, "The demolition of Sulukule can be defined as an act of violence by state and commercial authorities. However, the people of Sulukule did not react with violence toward these symbols of authority. This is a disarming defiance by a community refusing to be victims of circumstance, returning and building lives around their demolished neighborhood. Their positive defiance is expressed by supporting each other and the work of local associations for the future of young people while living in an area of the city that experiences high levels of poverty and crime. This is a beautiful and inspirational paradox. We don't believe in violence towards others as a force for transformation and change. We don't believe that the images of a police officer being beaten and burned by youngsters are constructive, challenging, or relevant. Together, through our voices and partnerships, we support a message of love, community, and togetherness, the forces that brought us to and sustain us in Sulukule. We invite you to join us in engaging, celebrating, and supporting this ancient and culturally vital community." So Abbas asked Funda Oral and other members of the Sulukule Platform to support and distribute his organization's statement against the violence in Wonderland. They responded, they met to discuss it, and they responded with a refusal based on the following points. One, they didn't believe that such a declaration would actually change the situation for the dislocated children of Sulukule, which was their mission. Two, they did not believe that the goals of the Sulukule Platform would be negatively impacted by the video. Three, Tarabat de Isyan themselves approved of and willingly participated in the video, so they wanted to stand by them. And finally, by the time the statement had been released, the violence was over, and it didn't seem appropriate to condemn the film after it had garnered so much local support and attention. Nor did the activists want to negatively impact their relationship with biennial installation organizers and the director and producers of Wonderland, who'd been very supportive of Tarabat de Isyan and the mission of the Atelier. After receiving this refusal, however, Abbas ended Open Visor's relationship with Tarabat de Isyan and the Atelier and withdrew all funding. Part of the justification used by the Fatih municipality to garner support for the demolition of Sulukule was the neighborhood's reputation for prostitution and drugs. Sulukule was made out to be a dangerous place that the state couldn't penetrate, and that the average Istanbul resident dare not enter. In fact, when I was there doing my research, the taxi drivers who I would ask, eventually I learned not to take a taxi, but they would always say, "I don't think that's where you actually want to go." In Wonderland, the members of Tarabat de Isyan invite viewers into the neighborhood, actually, just like that 40 Days, 40 Nights event. Through the video, you're invited into their lives to see and experience it firsthand. By drawing attention to their poverty and frustration, they also challenge the assertion made by the Fatih municipality that by demolishing Sulukule, the residents had been offered better lives. However, the representation as angry and resistant proves to be much more complex when we look at the larger context in which this particular portrayal developed. A particular kind of Roma identity is represented by Tarabat de Isyan in Wonderland. This oppositional, hostile, urban Roma contrasts significantly with the representations of Roma that Turks are generally exposed to. I couldn't help but share this picture I found on the internet. I don't know, I've never seen it or heard of it before. Sulukule musical, really? Okay. So normally Turks are exposed to Roma as entertainers in mehanes and tourist venues and in television shows and movies. In these portrayals, the Roma are cast as urban outsiders, not fully modernized, associated with backward rural migrants, nevertheless valued for preserving traditional Turkish culture. The Roma generally live in segregated areas of the city like Sulukule, and non-Romani Turks rarely interact with them except for the exchange of goods or services. However, with the growing Romani movement, Turkey's Roma have appeared more often in the news as victims of urban renewal, job discrimination, and other social concerns. The Roma spokesmen for these communities generally avoid criticism of the government and prefer to work through official channels to secure what they call positive discrimination and equal rights to employment, housing, healthcare, and education. They're not represented at all in the media as angry and hostile. Rather, they're presented as victims of social injustices and advocates for change at the level of policy and social consciousness. So it's about change through policy and education. That's quite different from Tarabati Isyan in the Wonderland, right? They evoke associations with Kurdish resistance and other anti-state activist movements, wearing bandanas over their faces, raising their fists, battling bulldozers, and throwing Molotov cocktails. The more direct association with these images, however, and more recent association is with Gezi Park, with the protests of summer 2013, which were initially intended to contest the urban development project for Istanbul's central public gathering space, Taksim's Gezi Park, but actually snowballed into a broader movement when protesters were violently evicted from a sit-in by police. Participants at Gezi Park grew to include environmentalists, anarchists, socialists, communists, feminists, labor unions, Kurds, LGBT groups, and more. Many of the non-Roma Sulukule Platform members were actually directly involved. So some of those networks that were formed by the Sulukule Platform actually informed the networks that went into the Gezi Park protests. Conspicuously absent were the representatives of the Roma Associations. They just were not there. As one Roma activist from Edirne told me, who went on her own, not as part of the association, she said, other Roma are not here, they're against us. The major exception was Tarabati Isyan. The members of the hip hop group attended the protest not only as participants, but they were also invited to perform. And since then, many interviews and invitations for collaborative projects have followed. So Abbas's portrayal of Sulukule contrasts sharply with that of Wonderland, right? Demonstrating the tensions that exist in competing attempts to represent Sulukule according to a particular case. He claimed that the video prompted overwhelming concern by young people and parents in Sulukule, which suggests that not all of the dislocated Sulukule residents felt that the film represented them. He also states that even though the demolition was an act of violence on the part of the municipality, the people of Sulukule were right to not react with violence themselves. He calls this a beautiful and inspirational paradox, and an example of positive defiance on the part of a people with strong resilience. So in Abbas's portrayal, the dislocated residents of Sulukule are victims of violence, who nevertheless did not resort to violence themselves. He goes on to paint a picture of Sulukule sustained by the forces of love, community, and togetherness. Quite different from the picture of resistance offered by Tarabati Isyan. Oops. Okay, I'm missing another slide. Good. Sorry about that. So what is at stake in this contest over the representation of Sulukule is the ability to define what kind of activism is appropriate against urban renewal projects, and when, if ever, violence is justified. An issue of central importance and an ongoing debate now regarding the Gezi Park protests. Furthermore, the ability to define what kind of citizens the Turkish Roma should be is also at stake. Amidst a growing Romani rights movement in Turkey, Abbas's resilient, nonviolent yet defiant Roma resonates with human and minority rights discourses that find salience among the Roma associations in Turkey. On the other hand, Wonderland's portrayal of Tarabati Isyan suggests that Turkey's Roma are to be active citizens and equal participants in the making of the city, even if that involves violent resistance against a state making recourse to authoritarian tactics. This potentially violent Roma resists assimilation, in direct contrast to the stated goal of the Roma associations to promote integration and positive discrimination. Furthermore, hip-hop music is not generally associated with the Roma of Turkey, nor is it considered an aspect of intangible heritage to be saved or preserved. Instead, it speaks to their inheritance as displaced youth on the margins of society, living in a highly policed neighborhood with high unemployment rates and crime rates. This Roma citizen is not interested in pursuing official channels of integration. Rather, he's disillusioned with his government and fed up with his circumstances. He embodies a growing frustration with Turkey's neoliberal authoritarian government. So to conclude, in this presentation, I demonstrated the tensions between various agendas for Sulukule and suggested that these tensions actually characterize the present struggle for the displaced Roma of the demolished neighborhood to relocate themselves in the city, their place in the city. Furthermore, I propose that a particular kind of Turkish Romaness is being produced in the aftermath of Sulukule's demolition, one that is politically active, participates in resistance, negotiates with state actors, and represents Roma identity and the Romani rights cause in the media. Most importantly, this Romanist is an urban citizen, actively engaged in making the city. The utility of assemblage urbanism for understanding Sulukule is a focus on the relationships and the networks that emerge, rather than a study of Sulukule as an example of something else, something larger like neoliberalism or oppression of the Roma. As Farias reminds us, urban life is obviously tightly entangled with different economic processes, but our underlying questions should address how, through various processes and phenomena, the city and urban life are literally being reconstructed and remade. With this approach, we can understand capitalism as a form of life, although not a global abstract logic imposing its forms into local spaces, but as a concrete process, assuming multiple forms even within a city. So rather than framing global economic processes as structures that work to oppress marginalized urban dwellers from above, I've described the ways that multiple actors participate, albeit in asymmetrical capacities, in public matters around engagement with one particular urban concern, that of the demolition of a neighborhood. Similarly, Roma integration into political and public life in Turkey is clearly happening in multiple ways, not all of them official, not all of them state organized or state sanctioned even, which demonstrates their capacity to transform the city in which they live. Thank you very much.